Welcome back to the Talking Hedge. I'm Josh Kincaid, and this is your Cannabis Business Podcast. Today, we're going to dive into a report from New Frontier Data about cannabis cultivation in California. On the line with us is Dan Kimmis, our CBD correspondent with Good CBD Products.
You know, I am on the line this morning. I'm like, literally, my toes are on the line, Chronic.
So you got about another week and a half or so until you're going to be down in California. You're going to check out the first legal cannabis cafe there in West Hollywood and check out the scene.
Yeah, you know, the reality of go there, be there, see it with your own two eyes. You know, for all we know, the reality, right, so often doesn't really match with what you think it's going to be. But on this one, I'm pretty excited, brother, because I think it's going to be, you know, more than I imagined. So, yeah.
It's a crazy market down there. So this article goes on to say, quote, with rising concern over vape products, CBD supplements, and overall cannabis-driven substances, consumers will look to brands that can provide clarity and competence in product safety and quality control. Humboldt growers committed to a higher quality cultivation standard, which is gaining increased traction across the industry, especially as manufacturers look to mitigate heightened concerns and scrutiny over the regulated and unregulated products. And so the article goes into having four key findings from the report, which is that 25% of all California cannabis cultivation licenses are held by Humboldt County growers. It's a serious concentration. That's a gigantic state, fifth largest GDP in the entire world, and yet a quarter of all licenses are held in Humboldt County. It's good terroir and good individuals that have a lot of history up in there, but again, concentration may or may not be good if there's a lot of issues like they saw in California or even Colorado, where the early freeze, there's millions of dollars in crop loss because of the early winter this year. So if you have a lot of consolidation, you have the potential for blight or some kind of mass decimation.
Yeah, you know, one of the things that I'm really excited about getting into Cali for is getting a clear understanding of what's happening on the ground. But, you know, you touched on it, the amazing, you know, the historical brain trust, right? The amazing bank of information of old growers in Humboldt should be pretty interesting to go touch.
So one of the second key findings is that more than 8 out of 10 cannabis growers surveyed had been cultivating for more than 10 years. So that's a serious amount of knowledge and knowing their own climate, knowing their own strains that they can grow. Hopefully that kind of knowledge, that tribal knowledge, won't go away with regulation, but it's going to be hard to find homes for all of those cultivators or growers in this regulated market.
In some of my previous runs, I've had a chance to meet up with some folks who are growing grapes or growing olives or growing any of a number of things who, along the way, Chronic, they pull out their jar, right? And they say, oh, yeah, I grew this while I was growing that, right? Again, the depth of knowledge, and again, that whole thing of, their own genetics and all of that. Yeah, special, different, and fun.
About 60% of the growers that were surveyed reported harvesting 2.5 ounces per square foot of grow space, reflecting the cultivation expertise in the region. 2.5 ounces per square foot, I guess that's decent. I'd be more impressed with 2.5 ounces per cubic foot. But the last key finding is that 43% of growers surveyed draw electricity from the grid, reflecting efforts made to lower electricity costs. There is a lot of water, a lot of electricity, a lot of natural resources put into growing cannabis right now, as kind of the discerning customer wants indoor, whereas a natural agricultural crop is going to be grown outdoor or in hoop houses, greenhouses. But the indoor community takes in a lot of electricity. So hopefully they can figure that out with some alternative energy sources. In other news, cannabis advertising firm Weedmaps cuts 100 jobs in response to a slow adult use market rollouts. So this California market advertising giant Weedmaps announced yesterday it laid off a quarter of its workforce, according to the Cannabis Business Daily. The report goes on to say, quote, blaming the slow rollout of recreational marijuana markets in California and Massachusetts and dwindling pool of outside funding, end quote. So it looks like California's slow rollouts is already starting to take on some casualties. A quarter of the workforce is not great when you're trying to compete against Leafly or Headset or other, um, competitors. That's it's not going to instill a lot of confidence.
Yeah, I look at it another way. I like lean operations, right? And 100 people selling cannabis ads. Okay, if they're banking revenue, if they're paying for themselves, then certainly I don't want to see them get hit with the phaser, right? But at the same time, you do the square on that. If they're pulling real wage, right? If they're actually making bread, 100 people, when you go look at that against the bottom line, brother, again, less is more. Less is more.
I think with the new industry and especially technology, there's a lot of changes and advancement. And so I'd like to see more of a scale up or an appropriate amount of hiring. And so there's been some other companies that have laid off half their workforce that I've heard about. So it's a little concerning, but I think some of it has to do with one of the points that are mentioned, which is that tech and cannabis capital markets have experienced tightening this year, limiting the ability to leverage outside capital to fuel growth.
Well, it's a little counterintuitive, but legalization hurts your efforts, right? The next thing you know, like if you're Weedmaps, you suddenly one day you had to stop letting illegal stores, right? Black market or gray market stores advertise, right? And things like that, where again, you had revenue, but you actually had to turn it off because the rule change. Those things, again, the next thing you know, you've got to go find a whole new set of clients and create revenue in a whole different kind of market condition, right? So again, lop that crew that's sitting around doing nothing, man. If you're twiddling your thumbs, time for you to go, homie.
So the CEO said, quote, "This rapid growth requires us to be prudent in how we deploy capital and ensure that we can nimbly attack new markets and new software opportunities as they arise." So according to a source close to Weedmaps, most of the company's revenue growth comes from outside of California, and most of the company's fastest growing sources of revenue were limited to licensed operators. But nonetheless, I mean, it's one of those things where a company tried to scale too fast, too early, and kind of had some scaling back. What we've seen in the capital markets is the amount of money being raised is reducing, and also the number of deals in the latter half. So early 2019, what we saw is multi-state operators and some cannabis cafes and some technology that's really scaled back. And in the second half of 2019, what we've seen is a lot of cultivation licenses get gobbled up. MedMen has retreated back. A lot of the ETFs and indexes have retraced, almost 60%. And so some of this capital is starting to look at it through the traditional lens, where it's a value investment, not necessarily speculative. So maybe that'll change, maybe with the Safe Banking Act or some opportunities that'll kind of spark some more speculation, or some more legalization might open up some opportunities. But you got to come back to the Talking Hedge and find out. So with that, we're going to roll this one up. I'm Josh Kincaid. This is the Talking Hedge. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't, and I'm out.